Please rise. May 25th, 2022 meeting of Haliburton County Council is now in session. Warden Liz Danielson presiding.
Morning, everyone. Please be seated. I don't have much for opening remarks except to say how wonderful it is to see everybody in person. It's nice to finally be back to an open meeting. Could you take a roll call, please, sir?
Sure. Warden Danielson.
Present.
Councillor Moffat.
Present.
Councillor Roberts.
Present.
Councillor Kennedy.
Present.
Councillor Burton.
Present.
Councillor Ryle.
Present.
Councillor DeVolen.
Present.
And Councillor Shell.
Present.
Thank you.
We respectfully acknowledge that the County of Haliburton is located on Treaty 20 Mississauga territory and in the traditional territory of the Mississauga and Chippewa nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations. We acknowledge a shared presence of Indigenous nations throughout the area and recognize its original Indigenous inhabitants as the stewards of its lands and waters since time immemorial. Could I have a mover and a seconder to adopt the agenda, please? Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Moffat.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that the May 25th, 2022 Haliburton County Council agenda be approved.
All in favor? That's carried. Is there any notice of pecuniary interest or general nature thereof this morning? Hearing none. Could I have a mover and a seconder to adopt the minutes of April 27th? Moved by Councillor Shell, seconded by Councillor Roberts.
Moved by Councillor Shell, seconded by Councillor Roberts. Be it resolved that the minutes from the April 27th, 2022 meeting of Haliburton County Council be adopted as circulated.
All in favor? That's carried. We have no business arising from the previous meeting, so we'll move into delegations. And the first delegation is Oscar Poloni giving us the year-end audit report for 2021.
Sorry, was just taking myself off mute. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, members of County Council. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to be here today to present the audit findings and financial statements for Haliburton County for the year ended December 31st, 2021. I'm hoping you can see my screen. So with respect to the financial statements of the county, we are prepared to issue what we call an unqualified or a clean audit opinion. This is the highest level of assurance that you can achieve under Canadian auditing standards. What the opinion says, and what you'll notice, is it doesn't say that your financial statements are accurate, because that would require us to test every transaction. Rather, what it does say is that your financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects. And materiality is the level of errors that we're able to absorb before we require your staff to either correct the errors or we change our opinion. It's determined as a percentage of prior year's revenues for municipalities. So for this year, the materiality was $770,000. Now, materiality determines a number of different aspects of our audit. For example, it determines our sample sizes when we do testing, but also what it drives is it determines our posting threshold. And this is the level above which, if we have any uncorrected accounting errors, we're actually required to report them to County Council as part of this presentation. So our posting threshold is 5% of materiality, or an amount of $38,500. The audit has gone well, and during the course of our audit, there were no corrected or uncorrected audit differences above our posting thresholds. And so because of this, when we say it's a clean audit opinion, it very much is so, because we haven't had to eat into our materiality by absorbing errors uncorrected. We haven't identified any significant weaknesses with respect to internal controls. We don't test every control. County only those that we deem appropriate for the purposes of reliance from an audit perspective, but there was nothing that we identified that we would suggest represents a significant weakness. There were no difficulties with management. We're very appreciative of the cooperation that was provided to us by Ms. Bull, and the team of the finance department inside the county. No limitations on our scope. Basically, we were able to achieve all of the information that we asked for. There was nothing withheld, and there were also no changes to our planned audit approach. So with respect to the financial statements, the first statement is the statement of financial position, and this is a snapshot of the assets, liabilities, and accumulated surplus of the county at December 31st, 2021. Just in terms of some of the changes from a year-over-year perspective, your cash and investment balances, which are the top two lines, have increased by roughly $2.6 million. This is a combination of factors. Part of it is the fact that you did have an operating surplus this year, and so your cash balances normally would come up. In addition, there were some changes to working capital where you would have collected some accounts receivable. You would have had some differences with respect to accounts payable that would have made the changes. With respect to your investments, what we've shown here are the value of your investments broken down by component. So the county has investments in a couple of different investment vehicles. The majority of your money is sitting in a high interest savings account, which generates interest income, obviously, isn't really subject to risk of fluctuation for market values because of changes in market conditions. You can see you also have some money in a money market portfolio, corporate bond portfolio, and an equity portfolio as well. So you have roughly $6.5 million of investments at cost, which are currently valued at just over $6.6 million. So there's a gain on appreciation there. What you can see is that over the last year, you've actually had cumulative interest income, cumulative investment income, and changes in valuations of roughly $101,000. So this is your investment income from those investments. Since you've started with these investments, you've had cumulative investments of $246,000. So despite changes from a market perspective, despite what some people would call turmoil in the markets, as you will, you're still above water, if you will, from an investment perspective and from a fair market value perspective. With respect to other assets, you can see there's roughly $1.4 million of accounts receivable at year end. This represents revenues that are earned by the municipality at year end, but collected after year end. It's gone up by about $663,000 from the prior year. The biggest change relates to amounts that are owing to you for cross-border ambulance services from neighboring municipalities, as well as some federal and provincial grants that were owing to you at year end with respect to the Haliburton County Rail Trail project. With respect to liabilities, accounts payable and accrued liabilities represent expenses that are incurred prior to year end, but paid after year end. There's a number of different things that factor into this, but what you'll notice is that your total accounts payable have gone up by roughly $1.4 million. The biggest single contributor to this is the fact that there's $850,000 of funding with respect to the paramedic program that was repayable at year end because it wasn't spent. So that money is shown as being repayable back to the funder. There is an increase in payables for Kawartha Lakes for health and social services. As members of County Council is aware, you purchased these services from the city of Kawartha Lakes. Last year, there was one bill outstanding for the fourth quarter of 2020. This year, there were 2 quarters outstanding. And so the increase is about $363,000. And then at year end, there was about $400,000 of invoices relating to capital projects that remained outstanding at year end. So depending on how much capital you do, depending on when you do it, oftentimes capital projects will increase the amount of your accounts payable. You'll notice there's a number for deferred revenue of $550,000 this year. This represents funding that's been received by the municipality that hasn't been spent yet. So rather than taking it into income, what you do is you defer it, you leave it on your books as deferred revenue, and then when you earn that revenue by spending the money, you bring it into income. This is really comprised of 2 components. And as you'll notice, the number is up by about $261,000. Last year, in 2020, the county received about $290,000 in funding for phase 2 of Safe Restart program. That funding was actually intended for 2021. So it went into your deferred revenue and then came out this year. But offsetting this decrease is $572,000 in gas tax funding that you've received but haven't spent yet. So under the terms of the funding agreement, you don't have to spend all of your gas tax. You are allowed to basically accumulate it or bank it in order to fund capital projects in the future. So there's 572 that was unspent. And just for the information of county, this is the breakdown of deferred revenue. For federal gas tax, you receive 1.1 million. You brought 573 into income. So there's 551 that's outstanding. You'll notice you've used all of your safe restart funding during the year. With respect to other liabilities, your municipal debt has gone down by roughly $380,000. These are borrowings that the municipality has issued for capital purposes. That decrease represents principal repayments that you've made during the year. So as you pay down the mortgages, the loans, obviously this number will go down. You'll note that from an asset perspective, there's roughly $43.2 million of tangible capital assets on the financial statements. This is your investments in roads, investments in buildings, investments in equipment and fleet. This has gone up by roughly $2 million on a year-over-year basis. So during the year, there was roughly $6.3 million in capital additions, which brings this number up. And then you've recorded amortization expense or depreciation expense of roughly $4.3 million, which brings this number down. Just in terms of the capital additions by type, you can see the largest single component of where you've spent money is on your transportation network. So roads of roughly $2.8 million, bridges and culverts of roughly $1.5 million. Then there's $878,000 for vehicles, $736,000 for equipment, and $261,000 of improvements to the multi-use trail. Just for a bit more detail for the county, we've provided a summary of capital additions greater than $100,000, and you could see once again, the majority of this relates to roads and culverts. There are some equipment pieces built into this, also an ambulance as well. So a bit of detail with respect to your capital additions for the information of County Council. The next statement is the statement of operations, and this is a summary of your revenues and your expenses for the year. And so what you can see is that your total revenues have gone up from roughly $25.8 million last year to $27.4 million this year. Your federal grants have gone up by roughly $187,000. $66,000 of this was funding under the National Disaster Mitigation Program, and $93,000 was funding from the ICIP program, which is an infrastructure program maintained by the feds in the province with respect to your rail trail upgrades. And if you'll recall, when we talked about accounts receivable, part of this funding is actually owing to the municipality at year end, so it's sitting in your accounts receivable. You can see that your provincial grants are actually pretty consistent on a year-over-year basis. So last year there was $5,365,000 of grants. This year, $5,321,000. So while the number is pretty close, Council, it's important to recognize that the nature of the funding has changed significantly. So what you can see from this grant is the largest component of your funding is with respect to your ambulance services. That has gone up by roughly $400,000. And that's the community medicine program that's undertaken by your paramedics. You can see that gas tax remains consistent. However, safe restart funding has decreased significantly. It used to be at $1.4 million last year. It's now $287,000. And this is because the pandemic is starting to lessen. What you'll notice though, is this decrease has been offset by an increase in OCIF funding. And this is the matching component from the provincial stand for the federal OCIF program, and that's gone from roughly $283,000 last year to $1,054,000 this year. So while you do look at provincial grants and you notice that the numbers are the same, the reality is the components that make this up are very much different on a year-over-year basis. You can see that user fees and service charges have gone up by roughly $375,000. The biggest increase in this is with respect to cross-border billings for land ambulance services. So during the year, the county billed 2 years worth of billings to Peterborough, Hastings, and Kawartha Lakes for cross-border ambulance services. So that would have driven this user fee revenue up. And once again, this is sitting inside your accounts receivable as well. What we can also see is if you go on a line-by-line basis for your user fees, most categories are up And what that reflects is very much the experience of municipalities in general, where you're seeing a reduction in the impact of the pandemic. And what I would call you're beginning to approach normalcy. In a number of cases, you haven't returned to pre-pandemic levels, but you are getting closer and you are having more revenue and more activity than you would have had in the prior year. So with respect to expenses, we show expenses down below broken down by function. So general government is with respect to administration. These costs are up by roughly $200,000 on a year-over-year basis. There's an increase in software licensing fees with respect to the transition of your accounting system of about $70,000. There's also payments to physicians included in here for your community health programs, which have gone up by about $41,000. Transportation services generally reflect your roads. These are up by about $217,000. $178,000 of that is amortization expense. So as we depreciate assets, we assign it to the categories. As you continue to reinvest in your road network, you'll generate more and more amortization. So that's about $178,000. We also saw an increase in the amount of maintenance that was conducted to the road network. This is something, once again, that we've seen as a result of the pandemic lessening, where people are starting to get back more to those core municipal functions. With respect to health services, which includes your land ambulance services, these have gone up by roughly $900,000. The biggest component is with respect to your land ambulance services. So a $530,000 increase in salaries and benefits, $148,000 increase for the community paramedicine program as part of the long-term care program, $134,000 increase in vehicle costs, and then transfers to public health, which is for the health unit, have gone up by roughly $46,000 as well. Recreation and cultural services have come up, predominantly library services. There's been an increase in salaries and benefits of $120,000. Once again, this is normalization post-pandemic. Website development costs of roughly $24,000 and ebook equipment and subscription costs of roughly $45,000 really make up the big components of the increase. From an overall perspective, County Council, what you have is you have an operating surplus of roughly $3.8 million, but more importantly, you have an accumulated surplus of roughly $47 million. A big component of this is the investment that you have in your tangible capital assets, but there are reserves and reserve funds out there. So just for the information of County Council, in the financial statements, there's segmented disclosures, that break down your costs by type, not necessarily by function. So we did a little bit of analysis with respect to your wages and benefits. Starting at the bottom, you can see your wages and benefits this year were roughly 29% of your salaries, which is generally consistent with what you would have seen in the prior 2 years. You can see that your average wage cost per employee is generally consistent with what you would have seen in the prior year. The number of employees has come up because we do this analysis based on full-time and part-time employees. And as a result of the pandemic, there was a dip with respect to the number of employees that you've employed because you weren't as busy. You didn't necessarily need all of the part-time staffing. You've seen an increase that really does bring you back to pre-pandemic 2019 levels. So once again, with respect to our audit is complete. What we require, quite frankly, is council to approve the financial statements at this point, at which case we'll talk to your staff about subsequent events just to make sure there hasn't been anything that's occurred in the last 2 weeks. We'll get them to sign the management representation letter, which is an attestation from them indicating that they've provided us with all information. There's no significant facts that haven't been disclosed. And then we're done. We'll take the draft stamp off, we'll put the signature on, and the audit for 2021 will be complete. As we've discussed, there's no difficulties that have been encountered during the course of our audit. No changes to our plans, no difficulties with management. Once again, from an audit findings perspective, there's no uncorrected audit differences. So this audit is clean in the purest sense of the word. No identified internal control weaknesses, no issues as a result of the pandemic and how it's changed your operations, and no issues around recognizing revenue for the pandemic. So County Council, that concludes our presentation of the financial statements. If there are any questions, more than happy to answer them at this time.
Do members of council have any questions for Mr. Poloni? Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the statements? Councillors DeVolen and Burton.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Burton. Be it resolved that Halliburton County Council receives for information the presentation from Oscar Poloni of KPMG regarding the 2021 audited financial statements and the draft financial statements for the year ending December 31st, 2021, and further that the 2021 audited financial statements be approved.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you, Mr. Poloni, and thanks to all the staff that have assisted. These statements are great.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next on the agenda is Mark Cox from Point in Time, who wants to talk to us about a transportation project.
Sorry for the Zoom delay. Thanks so much, Council, for having me here to speak today. You hearing me okay?
Yes, we can, and good morning.
Good morning. I'm here to share with you information I think you already have in front of you. We all know in Halliburton County that transportation is a real challenge. We also know that the pandemic has been really tough on people's mental health, and that there's much higher rates of substance use. I think I've seen figures that alcohol use is up by 25% during the pandemic. And we know that other substances are not just on the increase in terms of use, but people are utilizing those substances often by themselves, which means there's no one to administer naloxone, call 911, and we have more people dying, unfortunately, due to mental health and substance use in our county than we do to COVID. I say that because one of the things that you know is that the Youth Hub has been funded through Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario. And we've seen I shouldn't say after pandemic, during the pandemic, we've seen our numbers starting to soar. I think the calculation is that we're up over 220% from the previous year in terms of usage. So it's a service that's drawing youth in. Youth have a chance not only to participate in clinical services, psychiatric services, nurse practitioner services, peer support services, but also have a place to meet with other youth and build protective factors. Isolation is highly correlated with substance use and mental health. It's a place to have fun, and that connection is also very important because we'd like to try and help things from getting far down the slide as they need to. We've had a great partnership and do have a great partnership with Troy and Lakelands District School Board. They've been providing and co-paying with us late buses to a portion of the county 3 days a week. We know that summer's coming, and we also know that the late bus doesn't get everywhere in the county, and that there's a real need for transportation. We've had, like most organizations, private and public, we've had real HR challenges during the pandemic. And one of the things that's we think could make us more efficient as an agency is to start to try and provide transportation to our offices rather than because so many families don't have transportation going to see people in their homes. So that could make us more efficient. But the real ask is, so that's an additional benefit, but the real ask is for help in purchasing on a pilot basis of 1 year part of a driver's salary. We already have a fleet of vehicles, and we would find money to match the rest of the salary, but here to request $20,000 to help pay for just a little bit less than half of the driver's cost, particularly with benefits, to allow us to utilize one of the vehicles in our fleet to be dedicated to take youth to and from the youth hub, as well as continue to do outreach as we have been in other areas, and the additional bonus of also being able to transport point-in-time clients. You have the document in front of you. I'm happy to take questions or however you'd like to proceed, Madam Warden.
Do any members of council have questions? Councillor Moffat and Councillor DeVolen.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark, for this. In your appendix, you note that your staff travel as far as Kinmount, Dorset, and Cardiff. In terms of Dorset specifically, has there been any work done with the Dorset Health Hub in terms of community outreach? They do a lot of that.
No, there hasn't.
It's primarily for seniors, but just wondering if you have a working connection there.
No, we don't. We have a working connection with your recreation staff, but not your health hub staff. That would be an excellent contact. Thank you, Mayor Moffat.
If I may, the folks who are involved in the health hub are actually across the line in Muskoka. We have, but they do service a whole section of Algonquin Highlands. So certainly be happy to put you in touch with those folks and see if there's anything that can be done for the, I don't want to say our side of the line, but that's sort of how it plays out. So thanks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And well, we're mostly focused on serving Haliburton County. We know all around our fringes, they're buffer zones, and we serve people on both sides of the line.
Councillor DeVolen.
Well, good morning, Mark. Thank you for coming to us today with this ask. Obviously, I have an interest in transportation solutions. My question is, I suspect there's no shortage of demand for these services, and if you're successful with our support here, we'll go forward. But I'm going to ask the thorny question, year 2, 3, and 4, from a funding point of view. From my narrow perspective, this could potentially become an ask on an annualized basis. Do you want to, and that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily for a pilot against supporting this, but I'd just like you to comment on the longer term funding, where this may go, presuming this is likely to be successful.
Yeah. I think it will be successful, and thanks for the question. One of the things that I would hope is that County Council may in fact have a longer term goal in terms of what transportation investments you as a county decide to make. I think that can also help reduce the need for kind of more individualized transportation like this. But I would also say that having a pilot will also allow us to knock on the doors of other funders and explore other options, possibly even reallocating within pretty meager budget lines now. But we are intending this to be a one-year ask, and based on success, doing some problem solving going forward.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. Hi, Mark. Just curious, you mentioned, obviously a good relationship with the Trillium Lakelands District School Board and the transportation system there for school time. Summer is coming. So, and you've budgeted 35 hours a week for the driver. So could you give me a sample of what that would mean? So don't have school, like what would this sort of look like in terms of a scheduling and that type of thing for the summer and then for September?
Well, currently, The bus is running. The bus is running to Carnarvon, back down to Minden, and stops in West Guilford on the way. So pre-pandemic, we also were able to provide additional transportation for that distance between those people living between Carnarvon and Dorset, and also between, also I'll say broadly Highlands East, because the whole Gooderham, Irondale, Cardiff, Wilberforce area are not currently utilizing a late bus. So we'll really have to sit down and roll up our sleeves and figure out what the best routes are. But we know that some people some people can't take the late bus because they live too far and there's nobody at home to meet them with a vehicle to get them, say, from Carnarvon to halfway to Dorset. So I think in the beginning, it'll have to be on a sign-up basis and planned in advance, and probably use a rotating system so that in the peak times that people would be grouped going out to the direction they'd be going out to. And in the summer, I think we're good at really encourage people to be signing up in advance, finding out who needs to come in for appointments, who wants to come in for drop-in, and map it out based on that. But it's going to require people signing up to some degree. And we know that one of the things that is more challenging for the emergent adolescents is advanced planning. So we're really going to have to work with people to start to anticipate when they might be free or when they have an appointment to get there.
Any other questions? Councillor Kennedy.
Thank you. Hi, Mark. Great presentation. Just one question on the data. You state here that provide transportation also allow the county and ourselves to start collecting data. I'm just wondering if you could expand on that. What type of data are you collecting? And are you going to be contacting county staff to look at the challenges that have been identified in a number of previous reports that might help guide you in collecting specific data for the county? Just if you could expand on that a bit. Thank you.
And I'm sure with your EMS background, you know way more about data than I will ever know, especially in terms of transportation. But absolutely, we want to work with county staff to figure out what data would be helpful for us to be collecting that might be able to be used not only in helping map out our needs, but plan for them as a county, including all of our residents going forward.
Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, the data question just made me think of the community safety and well-being plan, where we had quite a conversation about data and silos of data, and our perhaps somewhat Pollyanna hopes that we can break down some of those data silos in the best interest of the community. So that data collection could live there, and point in time has a seat on that table. So this is the kind of thing that can feed into that singular body that is I guess don't know, should be convening soon. So let's just keep that in mind for the safety and well-being plan.
Thank you.
Just one question for me, and it's really not related to the transportation portion of it, but you'd said that alcohol abuse and use had gone up by 25%, and I'm wondering if you can break that down into youth versus adults at all.
I can't. I'm sorry, but one of the things that I do know is that in general, the literature, everybody's being hit in different ways by the pandemic. We know that racialized people have been hit particularly. hardly. We know that youth and seniors and women with children have been the biggest populations of people that have been hit. But we know that everybody's been impacted by the pandemic. I've seen a figure that 1 in 10 people are currently having a substance use issue. So across the lifespan, hopefully not too many toddlers.
Thank you. Any other questions? Can I have a mover and a seconder to approve this request? Councillors DeVoe and Ryal, sorry.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Ryle. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council receives the May 25th, 2022 Rural Transportation Pilot Project Participation Point in Time Staff Report, and that Haliburton County Council contribute a one-time $20,000 financial contribution to be made to this pilot project to be funded from Safe Restart funding.
All in favor? That's carried. Thanks so much for your presentation, Mark, and good luck with the project.
Thanks so much for your support. Really appreciate it.
Okay, our final delegation for today is Jason Farragon from JL Richards and Associates with a background report on the short-term rental project. Good morning to Jason et al.
Good morning, Madam Warden. How are you this morning?
Just fine. Look forward to hearing your report.
Thank you, Madam Warden. If it pleases council, we can begin.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So we're very happy to have the opportunity to meet with County Council this morning and to provide you with an update on the work that we are doing on the short-term rental accommodation review on your behalf. I'm joined this morning by my colleagues, Tori Ruck, who is a planner in our Kingston office, as well as Gursimran Sani, who is a planner in our Guelph office. And Tori, Gursimran, and I will sort of be sharing presentation responsibilities this morning. So I'm going to kick things off. I'm going to pass it over to Gursimran, who's going to walk through sort of the results of our research into the scientific literature around short-term rental accommodations together with the municipal precedent review that we've conducted on your behalf. And then Gursimran will pass it along to Tori, and Tori will walk us through the highlights of the community survey, which we had received an astounding response to. So Tori, if maybe we can go to the first slide, please. I believe I've already covered that perhaps with my introductory comments, but the intent, Madam Warden, of us being here today is really to just sort of check in with council and give you an update on our work to date and to collect your feedback and your direction, both on sort of the findings of the research that we've done together with the community survey. Tori, the next slide, please. So County Council will recall that the process that has been initiated as it relates to the short-term rental accommodation review program is really sort of divided into 3 phases. And what this slide shows is that we are making good progress on our efforts, and we are firmly in phase 2 of the study, which is, as sort of indicated on the slide, we refer to as our understanding and our directions phase. So we are still in the understanding component of that understanding and directions phase, and so therefore still sort of wrapping our heads and our arms, if you will, around sort of the nature of both the issues and the opportunities that this sort of trend presents for Haliburton County. Tori, the next slide, please. So as I had sort of mentioned, since the last time we had met with County Council, we've done a bunch of research and the community consultation survey. So what I'm going to do is I'd like to turn it over to Gursimran, if I could, to begin to walk us through sort of the highlights of both the literature review and the municipal best practice review. Gursimran?
Thank you, Jason, and good morning, everyone. So I'll start out with an overview of the statistics for the county that would inform the short-term rental policy. Yep, that's the story. Thank you. So first, the county has seen a growth of about 13.9% since 2016 and approximately.
I'm sorry, Gursimran, to interrupt you, but you're very hard to hear. You're echoing, and it's almost impossible to hear you.
Okay, just give me 1 minute. Please let me know if you can hear me now.
Not well, no.
Okay, let me try this here. Is this any better?
That is a bit better.
Okay.
And just maybe slow down a little bit.
Okay. Okay, so I was introducing the statistics for the County of Haliburton that will inform the short-term rental policy. First, this county has seen a growth of about 13.9% since 2016, and approximately 46% of the dwellings in the county are occupied by usual residents. Usual residence, as defined in census, means a private dwelling in which a person or a group permanently resides. So 46% of the dwellings in the
I'm sorry,
county.
Gursimran, we cannot hear you.
So
There's a
Gursimran,
huge echo, and because she's a fairly fast talker, it's not coming across.
sure. Well, if it's okay. If it's okay, Madam Warden, maybe what I can do is assist Gursimran while she sort of works out her technology issues, if that's okay.
Okay, sure.
Thank you, Madam Warden. So I think as Gursimran was saying, that the county in between the latest census periods has seen a considerable sort of rate of growth at almost 14%. And the next statistic will come as no surprise to County Council that 40% or 46% of dwellings within the county are occupied by usual residents. So what Gursimran was explaining is that usual residents, as we sort of indicated on the slide here, are sort of defined statistically as folks that live in the county on a full-time basis. So a high proportion of your dwellings within the county are occupied by individuals that don't live in the county on a full-time basis. Again, no surprise to County Council, the vast majority of dwelling unit types within the county are in a single detached form. So that I don't think is a surprise to anyone. And in terms of tenure, the vast majority of your dwelling unit types are owner occupied as well. So not a lot of sort of that balance between ownership and rental is a little bit different in the county. In terms of housing affordability, about 20% of tenant households are in subsidized housing, and about 50% of tenanted households spend more than 30% of their shelter cost. And that's interesting when you sort of think about that statistic in the context of this discussion that we're having around short-term rental accommodations and the influence that short-term rental accommodations can have on attainability and affordability and choice within your local housing market. And in terms of the tourist accommodations, we've talked a couple of times now with County Council about the number of tourist accommodations within the municipality, and doing some sort of research on our end, we were able to sort of uncover about 44 tourist dwelling facilities that exist within the county that comprise about 470 units. And so these statistics, I think, provide a partial picture, I think, of sort of some of the key statistics that we need to understand when sort of thinking about short-term sort of rental accommodations. And they provide the basis, I think, for further discussion around potential sort of policy changes or regulatory changes or other sort of tools that the county may decide to use as an outcome of this study in terms of providing additional education or regulation as it relates to the short-term rental accommodation market. Now I see Gersimran is back with her headset, and so would you like to do a sound test, Gersimran, to see if County Council can hear, and then perhaps we can proceed?
Yeah, please let me know if this is any better.
That's better.
Okay. Thank you for your assistance there, Jason. Tori, if we can move on to the next slide. I think Jason has given us some context on that one. So I'll take over and give a brief overview of the legislative context. So in terms of the province of Ontario, amendments to the Municipal Act were made in 2017 that enabled municipalities to collect municipal accommodation tax with an objective to promote tourism. In terms of the county OP, short-term rentals are not directly addressed. However, there are policies around supporting housing affordability as well as tourism and associated businesses. Additionally, both the county's housing strategy and 10-year housing and homelessness plan outline the need to increase rental supply, and I mean long-term rental supply, and ultimately housing affordability. We also looked at the official plans for the 4 lower-tier municipalities in the county. All municipalities have engaged in the short-term rental conversation and research at various levels. Additionally, all municipalities have a balance of economic and tourism development, as well as housing affordability objectives in their official plans. On the slide, lastly, I note that there are other tools at the disposal of municipalities, such as a waste collection bylaw or property standards bylaw, a noise bylaw, as well as a parking bylaw, which can be used to regulate short-term rentals. If you can take me to the next slide, Tori, there. So here I'll provide the major takeaways or highlights from the literature review. Through the review of various studies, the major considerations for short-term rentals that emerged are, number one, data sources. So using on-site data to inform policy, effective regulation and implementation mechanisms. And one of the key factors that emerged was distinguishing between different type of short-term rental operators and reviewing the role of platforms in regulation implementation. So there are some operators that rent out rooms in their primary dwelling, while there are others who, for the purpose of investment, would buy properties and run short-term rentals like that. So the importance of distinguishing those different type of short-term rental operators has emerged as a major consideration in SCR policies. Further, the major regulatory approaches that have emerged are limiting the number of rentals per operators, limiting to primary residences versus whole house rentals, partial or full ban in certain areas or zones, limiting the number of nights a year that a unit can run an SDR, and finally tying in SDR licensing with a particular rental vacancy rate. And we can look at these approaches in detail in some of the next slides. If Tori can take me to the next one. Okay. So this slide shows the short-term rental practices in other municipalities. We've picked a range of municipalities, one which have a strong tourism potential and base, such as Blue Mountains, Prince Edward County, and Whistler, and others which have implemented some unique policies in light of STR concerns, such as Vancouver and Brampton. So all the municipalities you see on screen use licensing as a tool to regulate short-term rentals. Usually there is an application fee and an annual renewal fee associated with licensing. There are different approaches to that as well. So in some municipalities, such as in Huntsville and in Prince Edward County, you will note that the fees associated with primary residences is lower than whole home rentals. So that would be, that would encourage primary residences as short-term rentals instead of commercialized use of short-term rentals. So some municipalities, such as Blue Mountains, regulates density of short-term rentals by introducing a minimum separation distance between short-term rentals and bed and breakfast. In Blue Mountains, the separation distance is 120 meters. Whistler has a maximum GFA requirement in different zone, and Prince Edward County has a maximum density requirements in set radiuses in particular zones. So, for example, in residential zones, a maximum density of 15% of existing dwelling units in a 120-meter radius is permitted for short-term rentals. Occupancy requirements are fairly uniform across municipalities. Generally, it is 2 persons per bedroom with a maximum capping at 8 or 10. Similarly, parking is also fairly uniform, generally with the requirement of 1 space per bedroom. Landscaping requirements are noted in Blue Mountains and Prince Edward County's policies, both requiring rear and side yard landscaping in residential zones. There may also be a requirement of a minimum amenity space, as in the case of Niagara-on-the-Lake and Prince Edward County. Typically, all municipalities require inspections to ensure compliance with building code and fire code. There may be additional requirements such as indoor noise monitors to regulate noise levels. Apart from these, short-term rentals are sometimes not permitted in accessory apartments or secondary units, as in the case of Blue Mountains and Vancouver. In Prince Edward County, however, secondary unit can be used as a short-term rental, but only if it is on the same lot as the primary residence. So essentially what that's saying is that I cannot buy a property and have both the units on that property be used for short-term rental. So at least one of the units has to be a primary residence. We can also note the policy direction in case of Vancouver and Brampton, where housing affordability is a challenge. Only primary unit short-term rentals are permitted. While in the case of Whistler, short-term rentals in residential zones are not permitted to protect the long-term housing stock. I'd also like to note that Huntsville, Prince Edward County, and Kingston levy municipal accommodation tax on short-term rentals at the rate of 4%. If you can take me to the next slide, Tori. Thank you. So on this slide, I will summarize the addressal strategies for various considerations for short-term rentals that we reviewed in the literature and precedent review. First, we can regulate short-term rentals based on the type of residencies. So as noted in the previous slides, this can mean different things. It can mean limiting to primary residence only, as in case of Vancouver and Brampton, which do not allow unit rentals, or limiting the use of secondary units as short-term rentals. Secondly, short-term rentals can be limited by density to certain zones to support traditional hospitality industry, or regulated as an alternative to traditional accommodations. Next, we can cap the number of consecutive days or the number of days a year a unit can be used for short-term rental purposes. This may help to retain some of those units for long-term rentals. Next, to address issues like servicing and noise, we can limit the number of guests per short-term rental. Zoning can be used to permit short-term rentals in certain zones only, as we've seen in the case of Whistler, which does not permit short-term rental units in residential zones. Again, density can be limited through zoning. There may be additional setback requirements for short-term rentals set in the zoning bylaw. We can use the municipal accommodation tax for short-term rentals as seen in municipalities like Huntsville and Prince Edward County. And all municipalities that we've reviewed in the last slide have a fee structure for licensing and renewal. This will assist to offset some of the costs associated with implementation of these policies. Lastly, enforcement can be done through demerit system and fines. It is also important to capitalize on existing bylaws such as noise bylaw or a parking bylaw to enforce some of the STR regulations. An important consideration is building the municipal capacity for enforcement, which might mean more professionals, or it also might mean building a database management or building database management capacities. So this is the end of findings from the literature. I will now hand over to Tori, who will update us on the survey and its results.
All right, thank you, Cameron, and good morning, everybody. So overall, the survey was well received and responded to, and I want to take the opportunity to thank everybody for their participation up to this point. So we received 1,547 responses, with the majority coming from the municipality of Dysart and a fairly even spread between the remaining 3. So the intent of the first survey was to gather information about respondents' relationship to short-term rentals and get their initial perspective on the positive or negative aspects on the community. Due to the high number of respondents, we unfortunately were not able to go through all of the written comments individually. Instead, what we did was we created this word cloud to highlight the words most commonly used. And we did this for the general question at the end, where if you had an additional comment you wanted to leave for us. So what we got from the exercise was, in my opinion, a fairly good representation of the two different perspectives on short-term rentals. So for the positive viewpoint, we see words such as income, economy, revenue, tax and enjoyment, responsible, business and family. And for those less favorable viewpoints, we see words such as problem, issues, garbage, septic, and loud. So if we keep these words in mind, survey results did indicate that 70% of respondents are generally supportive of short-term rentals, with 55% indicating their support with further education and 15% without. And then the remaining 30% of respondents were not supportive of short-term rentals. So the question of whether short-term rentals have a positive impact on the community presented as a fairly even split between the options. Respondents voted highly for they increase tourism and provide additional revenue for property owners. However, no, they do not have a positive impact when the third most selected option. So when we then asked what the top 5 concerns related to short-term rentals were, we see loud noise and music as the top concern, followed by septic system capacity, fireworks outside permitted dates, bonfires during fire bans, and enjoyment of my own property. And the majority of respondents noted having these concerns only a few times a year. So given the information that we've gathered through the survey, we're going to use this to guide our second round of consultation. And the second round will focus more on the different ways on how to address the issues related with short-term rental. So it's just a high overview of the survey. We will be able to provide all of the survey results once we've got them in a format, but it's just sort of a high level. And now I'm going to pass it over to Jason to wrap this up.
Well, thank you very much, Gersimran and Tori, and to members of County Council. Apologies for the technical difficulties, and hopefully you were able to hear the balance of the presentation quite clearly. So as you sort of see, we've made considerable progress since our last time we got together in March. As Tori has indicated, we really thank members of the community for sharing their perspectives with us. I think, Madam Warden, we'll stop for now because we're very curious to hear County Council's sort of feedback on the draft background report, and also happy to sort of receive any direction from County Council at this point in time as we get ready to embark on the next step in this understanding and directions phase, which is to begin to reach out to sort of stakeholders, including the lower tier municipalities, to get their perspectives on this issue as well. Madam Warden, thank you.
Thank you. One thing that's apparent is that we need to have more enforcement of some of our existing bylaws for now. I'm looking for questions from council. I'm sure we've got some. Councillor Kennedy.
Yeah, thank you. When I was reading your background document, it struck me that a lot of your research has been based on urban short-term rentals, and as opposed to what I feel is personally, that's not an issue here. It's more of the lake issue that has come up. I don't know how many short-term rentals are off water. To my knowledge, there are no condominiums in Haliburton County that will currently allow short-term rentals. And I'm just wondering, you keep going back to housing impacts. And I don't believe personally that housing is relevant to this issue that we have on the lakes based on affordability of rent. If you're going to rent your cottage, you're going to want substantially more than what probably the market will bear as far as year-round rentals. So just that was one of my concerns. And I really like the Huntsville and Lake of Bays one as comparators or as research models. And I'm hoping that you spend more time on those types of comparators rather than Victoria and Banff and that are unique situations on their own. Thank you.
Did you want to respond to that, Jason, or no? Just receive it as information?
I think it is good feedback, Madam Warden. I think the municipalities that we had sort of surveyed were the outcome of a discussion that we had previously had with County Council. And I think that the feedback and the direction that we had at that time was certainly focused on, similar municipalities like Huntsville and Lake of Bays, because they are very close to Halliburton. They're very similar both in geography and the pattern of development. And I think in earlier meetings, we had also heard feedback at the same time that we should be casting our eyes further afield outside of the more immediate context and look at some other precedents in Canada that had more tourism-based economies, as Whistler was an example. So that was sort of the rationale for the composition of the municipalities that we had selected for the precedent review. Certainly appreciate Councillor Kennedy's point, and I think sort of hear more from us on that as we sort of continue to do sort of the next stage of work.
A couple of comments about that. I do agree with Councillor Kennedy's comment about the impact on housing as it relates to the study and the work that we're doing. However, it does, short-term rentals obviously do have an impact on the availability of housing, and something that we're going to have to keep in mind when we look at the overall issue of housing. One other comment that I'd like to make is that during our last Warden's Caucus meeting, we had a presentation from Roma, who wished to do some pretty serious work on the definition of rural, because what they're finding in statistics is that a lot of the rural numbers are being bulked in with urban numbers, and so there's not a clear there's not clear data on rural, what we see as being true rural municipalities. So that's a bit of a problem. Other questions, Councillor Moffat?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the report. It's a good starting point, I think. I do have a number of questions, probably no surprise there. I agree with Councillor Kennedy that I was looking more for comparators that were communities like ours, where we have 600 lakes, known and named lakes, and specifically in relation to shoreline residential designations. Bracebridge did a process in May, I believe, where they've had presentations to their council. They have an interim control bylaw while it's under review. Trent Lakes did one in March. They had a working group and they presented the findings to council, and Mayor Armstrong forwarded that to me because I know her she's on UPMUMP, so we have a relationship there. And their findings outlined a 3-year and 3-phased approach. It's a really excellent example of a very specific process. So I wonder if Bracebridge and Trent Lakes could have a look at. On the same vein, what I wanted to ask in relation to the comparators that were provided, it was a literature review, I believe, Jason, and I'm wondering if there were any conversations, if anybody spoke to anyone in particular, specifically around how many staff they may have had to hire to oversee the implementation of their program. How is it working? What challenges have there been, if any, and are they considering any changes as they go through the process? Some of these bylaws and processes are new. So wondering if you could talk to me about that a little bit. Thanks.
Sure. So through you, Madam Warden, certainly appreciate the comments and the question. And I think we'd be happy to look at, if it pleases Council, the Bracebridge and the Trent Lakes example. And then to Councillor Moffat's point, for now, the research is limited to the desktop review. So again, sort of compiling information. And I expect as we take the next stages, we'll be having more focused discussions, I would describe, with some of those municipal sort of precedents, in particular, the ones that are more similar to Halliburton than others. So I'm not proposing to call Whistler, but I'm happy to call Bracebridge and Trent Lakes and Lake of Bays and Huntsville to get their sort of experience on it. I think the question reminds me an awful lot of the shoreline preservation process that we've recently gone through together, and certainly understand the desire to learn more about administrative practices and I think the wealth of information that those conversations can bring forward to a discussion sort of this. So yes, we will be making that outreach if council would like us to.
Councillor DeVol, and then I think back to Councillor Moffat.
Oh, thank you, Jason. And I think some of my colleagues have already mentioned that some of the comparators that are closer geographically and the technicalities of the landscape there are more helpful. Certainly Huntsville, Lake of Bays, Prince Edward County to some extent, and a couple others that have been in kind of the next level of I guess analysis that I'd like to see is, the year that they instituted this, as again has been mentioned, what have been the findings, are they in year 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. I'm a great believer that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I'm hoping in this tighter group of analysis, whatever, that we can have some great copy and paste perspectives or outcomes that we could have. I don't have any interest in seeing this drag on for a few years. I think we've learned a little bit from the shoreline preservation bylaw, whatever, how that we may mitigate. I know we're a little bit more unique in that aspect than I think we are in short-term rental accommodations. I think there's a lot more comparators here in similar circumstances we could draw on. And I'd just like to see more of that as we head into the next phase of this, so that we can, it seems clear to me that anybody that's done this well to mitigate it has rules and bylaws and fees. To me, that's the moot point. Like, that's a given. Yes, we need to do it. Who does it the best, and how does it have the least negative consequences and not impose a financial burden on other taxpayers? I guess that's kind of the type of things that I would be looking forward to, Jason, as we go forward, please.
Okay.
I think back to Councillor Moffat.
Thank you. And to dovetail with what Councillor DeVolen said is, I took the time to go through all the examples provided in the report, and they all do have like rules and bylaws and fees, but they're not all similar. So I'm wondering, Jason, if you can advise, because they are different. So I'm not going to get into the details, but some of them have online maps and some of them don't. And some of them have a robust educational policy as well. Good neighbor agreements, codes of conduct. I think those things are a given as well. How will you discern which options you might provide to us, given that in the examples in the report, that they are similar in many ways, but dissimilar in many ways? So what's your process for refining that for next steps?
So through you, Madam Warden, I appreciate the question. I think in terms of our next steps, obviously we're going to take the feedback that we received today from County Council, go away, do some additional research, and then to Councillor Moffat's point, on our end, what we will do, building on what the work that Gerserman has done, is map out all of the options that we can possibly bring back to County Council for sort of consideration. A part and parcel of that process, I think, and this will come through conversation with staff, both at the county and the local municipal level, is talking about capacity and administrative practices. Because at the end of the day, what we want to be able to recommend, I think to Councillor DeVolen's point, is something that the county, should County Council choose to, can implement relatively quickly without a high degree of sort of service change. So I think that would be sort of our starting point. I think from there, that would form the core of the recommendation itself. In addition to that, we would then have what I would sort of describe as optional service levels for County Council to sort of consider in terms of service levels enhancements as it relates to short-term rentals specifically. So I'm hoping that answers the question, Councillor Moffat, but I'm happy to clarify further if it didn't.
Further questions? Carry on. Oh. Go ahead, Councillor Moffat.
Thank you. It does, Jason, I think because there's such a broad range of options that it's important for us to refine what it is that those might get whittled down to. Just a couple of comments. The OPP currently has a temporary commander coming in from City of Kawartha Lakes. I'm wondering if we can find a local officer with on-the-ground knowledge for the OPP consultation.
Okay.
And I also wanted, it's just a curiosity, in terms of the stakeholder discussions with certain staff positions, are you able to elaborate on what it is you're looking for from certain staff positions who may have administrative knowledge, but not necessarily in the community knowledge? And sort of EMS and fire, what would you be looking for from them? Because they wouldn't, if it's in terms of responses, I don't think they would know if they're responding to a property owner or a renter. So just a little clarification around some of those stakeholder interviews. Thanks.
Right. So thank you for the question. So through you, Madam Warden, I'll back up and sort of adjust what I said earlier slightly. I think so. Our intent is to reach out to lower tier municipalities and have specific conversations with council. So we would like to be able to come to the upcoming series of council meetings to have very similar discussions with local councils to understand sort of the nature of the issues and the opportunities in the specific sort of municipalities. As part and parcel of that process, we will be reaching out to the administrative leadership with each lower tier municipality, be it the CAO or the clerks, and ask them a very specific series of sort of technical questions, if you will, that will sort of inform the analysis. So as an example, how many complaints have you received regarding short-term rental accommodations? Do we know where those complaints are located? Collecting that sort of information. You're quite right. The existing call procedures as it relates to fire or to EMS, they may not be logging whether or not the property is a primary residence or a short-term rental accommodation. What we're sort of hoping and maybe what will occur is through the process of questioning, this may lead to other thought processes at the local level around sort of administrative practice adjustments, which could then lead to additional information and insights into the short-term rental accommodation industry within sort of Haliburton County. And I would expect that would occur organically, Councillor, through these sort of conversations. So hopefully that answers the question, but I'm happy to clarify further if necessary.
It does, thank you. You know that I had concerns in the shoreline consultation about feedback being confidential. Can you speak to that a little bit? I found that not knowing what some members of the community had to say in that process was frustrating. So can we have some assurance that the feedback won't be confidential from County Council?
So through you, Madam Warden, yes, you have my assurance that this process is different, I would sort of say, than the the shoreline preservation process, which County Council will recall was more of an independent and objective review of the work that was conducted to date. So part and parcel of that process, we felt, I think that it was necessary to keep that sort of information and the feedback that we had received confidential. This is a much different process from that, and that information and the feedback that we received from stakeholders will be shared with County Council.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts, and then possibly back to Councillor Moffat.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely want to support my fellow councillors in the discussion over looking at more cottage country bylaws that are currently in place, and also the ones that Councillor Moffat suggested that are in the works, because that's who we are. We're completely different concerns than an urban center would have. So I think we really need to focus on those and best practices in areas where they are successful. And I believe it was Councillor DeBolen talked about, if an area has had a licensing bylaw in effect, if it's been in effect for a couple of years, well then, what's the uptake on it? How's that being received as well? On page 30 in the report and the survey, it talks about the question was, do you feel there should be limits on the number of days that the property can be used? And I can't see that, 500 or 600 people, over 600 people said no limits. I was really surprised about that, and I haven't had time to go through the many pages of direct comments. So I don't know if you've had time to review that at all. That's the thing that I had been hearing all along, was limiting it so that people weren't purchasing, particularly at the waterfront ones, which is what probably 90% of short-term rentals are, waterfront, that people were buying them for the sole purpose of renting them out. So if you don't limit the number of days, then they become a business. And the lakefront communities aren't the same. It's fine to rent your cottage out for a few weeks a year, and maybe now in the winter, if it's a full-time year-round cottage, more people are coming up in the off season. But I was really surprised about that number, and I just don't know if there's any comment that anyone could make on that.
Sorry, I lost the tail end of that, Madam Warden. Was that comment directed towards us? Or?
I think that Councillor Roberts was looking for a comment or response.
Yeah, so certainly appreciate that. And I think we were, I don't want to sort of use the term surprise, but that did stand out to us as sort of a result in the survey as well. But I would go back to some of the slides that Tori had presented earlier in our presentation to council. And I think it's consistent with the feedback that we also heard around, folks just feeling generally comfortable with short-term rent, or folks that responded to the survey feeling generally comfortable with short-term rental accommodations, either with or without the need for additional education. So I do see some consistency here. I guess the other point that I would make, very similar, and we've done this in the background report, and very similar to the shoreline preservation process, the survey that we have conducted is sort of a participatory based survey. So it isn't a probability survey. And so these are the opinions of the more than 1,500 individuals who took the time to complete the survey, but they're not necessarily representative of the county generally speaking. And that is sort of a drawback statistically with the sort of survey type. So we take the feedback for what it is. It's good feedback. I think successful practices, to Councillor DeVolen's point, and as we've sort of, Chris has pointed out, and as we've written in the draft report, there's usually a series of tools that are brought to bear on this, just to sort of ensure that any negative externalities are appropriately addressed in sort of each context. So hopefully that's helpful.
Councillor Rael, I'm sorry, I missed your hand earlier.
Yeah, Jason, thanks very much for the report. Excellent. I just got a couple of things. One, I totally support what my other councillors have said with regards to existing bylaws or bylaws that are in force at the moment and could be expanded to include some of the issues that have been brought up as short-term accommodation. Why? Because in many cases, noise and other similar type things are common across all of our basic county. The other thing I wanted to find out from is to differentiate between what I would like to call the casual, I let my cottage go out to local people, friends, that kind of thing on a semi basis, and the rules and regulations that would be required for that, versus someone who now promotes, basically uses that particular property as an income or part of a corporation. Have you found, or will you be able to find situations where they differentiate between the two? Because one is a commercial entity and the other one is not so much. Because I think that's going to be extremely important if we want this to work, because I don't want to see a bylaw that comes into play that's going to restrict the average person from saying, my uncle Bert and his 3 kids want to come out, or a good friend of mine that I have at work, as opposed to somebody who now advertises in the television. So if you have any information on how that can be differentiated in other municipalities, I certainly would be interested in finding out.
So Madam Warden, would you like me to respond to that point, or?
If you have a response, sure.
No, thank you. And Councillor Rao, thank you for the comment. And I think I wanted to sort of connect your comment back to some of our earlier discussions that we've had with County Council on this issue. And I think from our past discussions, it's clear to us that County Council is seeking a solution which differentiates, if I could use the term, casual short-term rental accommodation providers versus commercial short-term rental accommodation providers. And we will be coming back with some of that information, and some of that information will come from the interviews that we have yet to complete with the precedent municipalities. So as we reach out to Huntsville and Lake of Bays and Trent Lakes and others, we'll be asking them those types of questions to understand if they've differentiated between the casual and the commercial, and then if so, the different approaches that they have taken, their experiences and the approaches that they've taken. So we'll have some of that information in our next report.
Thank you. Councillor Moffat.
Thank you. To the comments that were made earlier about the survey, is there any correlation to be found? First of all, thank you for clarifying that it's the nature of the survey. Is there any correlation between who owns a rental property and what their thoughts were in the other areas of the survey in terms of the potential for those who have commercialized short-term rentals to have done the survey specifically so that those numbers land in no? Certainly none of us have our finger on the entire pulse of the community, but I was shocked by that number and automatically raised a bit of an eyebrow around that. So is there any correlation that those who feel that their lifestyle of commercialized short-term rental could be jeopardized may have negatively influenced the survey outcome?
I'm going to begin answering this question, but I would look to our technical expert, Tori, who sort of structured and administered the survey. I believe the answer is that there is not a correlation between sort of the survey responses, but I would defer to Tori in terms of how we structured the survey, Tori, and whether or not we're able to track responses through the survey to be able to correlate it back to the geography and whether or not an individual owns a short-term rental accommodation unit or not.
Yeah, I think we would be able to try and figure that out. It would take me a bit of time to go in and look at the numbers and move them around. Certainly something I could look into and try and get the answer for you, though.
Okay, thank you, Tori.
It would be interesting to see how that comes out. Continue.
Yeah, and I only say that just from some personal conversations from some folks who are upset that this process is in place, because that is how they make their living, buying cottages and renting them full time. And, that's just a fact that's out there. I wanted to comment too on, in a number of the examples, Lake of Bays, Blue Mountain, Whistler, Huntsville, Niagara on the Lake, and Prince Edward County, there were a number that modified their zoning bylaws to allow rezoning of certain properties. Would it be your intention to bring forward as an option the possibility of rezoning a waterfront property for the purposes of allowing short-term rentals? Because I don't think that would fly here. Just suggesting that.
So through you, Madam Warden. So as always, we're happy to follow County Council's direction on these matters. But I would sort of say in our next report, we will be delving into the pros and cons of potentially using your zoning bylaw to help regulate, as Gersimran had pointed out earlier, the sort of the density, if you will, either through some sort of setback distance within your bylaw, or whether or not it's some sort of number of units per acre within the waterfront area. We do need to bring that information forward so County Council can have an opportunity to consider it. At the end of the day, it'll be County Council's choice in terms of whether or not you want to introduce, working with your lower tier partners, whether or not amendments should be introduced into the zoning bylaw to use your land use planning tools to supplement or sort of reinforce any other sort of licensing tools that you may use, or education, for example. So we will come back with some additional information. To be plain, I'm not quite sure what our recommendation will be on that yet, because we haven't had an opportunity to kind of sort that through in our minds quite yet.
Councillor Dvolan and then Councillor Kennedy.
I'll be short and sweet, and it builds on that. Has anybody in what I'll call our Ontario cottage country comparators official plan and zoning stepped into that minefield and successfully negotiated it, Jason?
I think it's a good question. I would sort of defer to Gersimran on this one.
So we have seen various municipalities who have introduced a short-term rental bylaw and then amended their official plan or zoning bylaw to address some of those changes. I believe Whistler previously did not permit short-term rentals without a zoning bylaw amendment. So if you wanted to have a short-term rental, you had to get a zoning bylaw amendment to seek that special permission. But it was later amended, and now short-term rentals are permitted only in tourist accommodation zones and not in residential zones. So there are different approaches that different municipalities have taken. Some have permitted short-term rentals only in certain zones. Some have prohibited short-term rentals in residential zones. So the approaches there are many approaches. We, as Jason mentioned, we can bring forward all the approaches and then go from there.
Thank you, Gersimran. So I'm not sure if County Council caught all of that. I know I had difficulty hearing pieces of it, but I believe what I've heard is that the zoning is used in some of the precedent municipalities that we looked at, but not necessarily in cottage country precedents that we have examined to date and will continue to examine.
I have to say that it might be something that would not be well received here, but it is one of the tools that we definitely need to look at and see what aspects of zoning might be helpful. As one of the options. I think I'll go to Councillor Kennedy and then back to Councillor Moffat.
Thank you. Jason, just more of a comment or what your thoughts are on this. I keep hearing local real estate agents are still promoting the purchase of cottages as either partial or full income generators. And then when doing some research, I noticed that other jurisdictions and upper tiers or whoever were looking at this actually implemented a thing called the interim control bylaw, which is allowed under Section 38 of the Planning Act. It doesn't affect current short-term rentals, but it does put a halt on allowing any more until such time as the municipality or the upper tier makes a decision or completes their research. I'm just wondering, is this something like a horse that's left the barn on us, or is this something that we might consider? I just feel sorry for somebody that buys a cottage with the intent of renting it out, and then we say you're not going to be able to do that for X number. That's almost, because we are considering it, but nobody's telling the prospective purchasers. So this looks like a tool that we might be able to use, or is it beneficial at all? Thanks.
So through you, Madam Warden, yeah, so Councillor Kennedy rightly points out that interim control bylaws are a tool that are available to municipalities to use when they see an emerging land use issue in their community, and they want to be able to put a pause on that issue, if you will, to give them time to study the issue and then to make changes to their land use planning documents. I think given the focus of the interim control specifically on land use planning changes and just sort of reflecting on the very recent discussion that we've had about, perhaps the effectiveness of any changes to the upper or lower tier official plans and zoning bylaws, I would say in this particular instance, my advice, subject to feedback from perhaps Mr. Stone, is that this is occurring outside of a Planning Act process, and that the interim control bylaw may not necessarily be the most appropriate tool to sort of use in this case. The other piece with interim control bylaws, they are quite an effective tool when used appropriately, but I would also sort of say that when they are used, they can cause quite a significant amount of controversy within the community, because in a way they're perceptions of the interim control bylaws that they're impeding private property rights and an individual's ability to affect property transactions and to earn a return off of the property, if you will.
Councillor Moffat.
Thank you. Back to the rezoning that I believe Huntsville has allowed short-term rentals as an additional use in SR1 and SR2. Conversely, Prince Edward County does not. So there again, there's that some do and some don't. And it's very easy in our world to say, I don't say this facetiously, it's very easy to say, well, if there's going to be a rezoning application process, that would handle it. The problem with the rezoning is we make zoning decisions based mainly on land use planning principles. So we would need to ensure that documentation is built better back to accommodate for more community input, because we don't make land use planning decisions because we don't like it or because the neighbors don't like it. And so let's not set ourselves up for a process wherein the philosophy and feeling of community is lost in a very prescribed process.
So are there more questions about the report and what's being recommended for go forward? Councillor Roberts.
Just a very small note, there's a new cottage rental agency that just started up, but they do have quite a few listings. I've been seeing them on social media, and I can't off the top of my head think of the name, but maybe I could get that to Jason later for the stakeholder interview, if that's okay.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Any more comments or questions? I'd like to go to our planner, Mr. Stone. I'm sorry, Steve, I should have gone to you first because your report is actually first on the agenda, but I would look to you for any comments that you've got or suggestions for council.
Well, just a couple things that I would say is that I guess the next thing that Jason and I present to council is really sort of pivotal in terms of where this study will go. Jason's right. The council will have to decide whether it'll take, as the survey is suggesting, more of an educational approach to things, or is it going to take more of a regulatory approach to things? And on the regulatory side, there's probably two big options. One would be to look at policy and policy changes in all the official plans and definitions, shall we say, and regulations within the zoning bylaws, if that's an approach. The other option would be to pursue more of a licensing approach if you want to, again, as this surveys are suggesting, that it's an activity that the community wants to encourage, that you can approach it from a licensing standpoint, or you can have a blended approach, which is to combine policy regulation with a licensing program. Just Adam, our new senior planner, and I were embroiled in a similar study back at Seguin, and one of the things that we looked at, you were asking, I think Councillor Devlin was speaking to, was there something that was implemented successfully? And our research, when we were looking at it, sort of focused on the Blue Mountain approach, which they were having problems with chalets being rented out, and they ended up going through a very protracted review process that involved the court system as well as the former OMB. And at the end of the day, they were successful in having their policy and regulations defended and implemented. Their program's been around for plus 10 years, I would imagine. So there are success stories out there from policy regulation licensing standpoint. Niagara-on-the-Lake is another similar one that deals with more tourist homes. If you've ever been to Niagara-on-the-Lake, you can certainly rent tourist homes through their licensing program. But the licensing in both instances are tied back to policies and regulations that are formed in the in this case the town's documents. So be interesting to see what Jason and his team comes up with, and again, it'll be very pivotal in terms of what council directs us on how to proceed. So thank you.
Your use of the word embroiled makes it sound like it was a rather challenging project. Any questions for Mr. Stone or for J.L. Richards? Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering if, Steve, if you have any experience, or if anybody from J.L. Richards with, I think our economic development officer does, but the implementation of the municipal accommodation tax. You know, we've batted that around in Haliburton County for a number of years, as far back as the early 2000s. And there's always been pushback, and there always is. Just wondering if anybody has experience on the timeline for the implementation of such a thing, and how, well, I guess you're going to maybe recommend that, but how will you know if that's the direction we want to go, given that it's May in a term that's ending in a few months?
Thank you, Steve. So through you, Madam Warden, I wouldn't say that anyone at JL Richards has direct experience implementing a municipal accommodation tax. I do have some indirect experience given my former role at the City of Greater Sudbury, where Sudbury had implemented a tax in order to help fund some of the large projects that council was sort of contemplating, which were very sort of tourism-driven type projects, Councillor. So certainly have a network of individuals that we can rely upon to help give us the advice that we need from our perspective. But to go back to, I think, the discussion that we had earlier on zoning, it is a tool that county council can use, and we do need to come back with information on sort of the nature of the tool, how it could be used, and what the potential pros and cons are. And so you'll see some additional information from us on that, I would sort of say, in the next report. But I defer to Mr. Stone to kind of supplement my perspective on the issue.
No, it's safe to say that we'll have to do some exploration on that for the next report.
Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you to all of you for the work that you've done to date. I would look to a mover and a seconder to receive the report. Councillors Moffat and Kennedy.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Kennedy. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council received the May 25th, 2022 staff report entitled Haliburton Short-Term Rental Review Update for information, and that Halliburton County Council direct J.L. Richards to complete the Phase 2 understanding and direction of the short-term rental review.
All in favor? That's carried. Thanks once again.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
I think it might be appropriate to take a 10-minute break, if that's all right with council. Fine. Were there any questions on the report? Could I have a mover and a seconder to approve them? Councillor Shell and Round.
Moved by Councillor Shell, seconded by Councillor Ryle. Be it resolved that the recommendations from the May 11th, 2022 meeting of Halliburton County Committee of the Whole be adopted by Halliburton County Council.
All in favor? That's carried. Nothing from joint accessibility, I don't believe. So next up is planning, and we're back to Mr. Stone. Over to you, Steve.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Warden, to the rest of council. Just have the pleasure of introducing the latest addition to the planning department. So Adam Klauslewski is our new senior planner. So he'll be helping out primarily with the land division office, as well as day-to-day municipal plan review function that we carry on for the county in support of the township planning departments. Adam was my right-hand man when I was back in Seguin, and we tackled together a lot of the issues that the county is exploring right now. So his 12 years experience in cottage country is a tremendous asset, and I really enjoy his common sense approach to things. That's one of the things that made us such an effective team at Seguin. After a spell of working with me, he did get tired of me and moved on to Perth County. There he was involved in a single tier operation where the county planning department supported all the townships, 4 townships, in the delivery of their planning function. So, but I'm glad he missed me and has rejoined me, and will be number 2 punch when it comes to really good customer service for the benefit of the people here in the county, as well as the local planning department. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Steve, and welcome to you, Adam, to the County of Halliburton. It's good to hear that you two have had a previous working relationship, and you can hit the ground running a little bit faster than someone who's new to the processes. So welcome, and we look forward to working with you. Any comments or questions? So if you would like to go next to your planning department update.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, to the rest of council. The report itself is our standard report, just a couple of things to highlight. You will note that based on the public meeting that we had for the subdivision condominium, the applicant has heeded some of the comments, and they will be looking at revising the plan. The timing on that is a little uncertain, but that being said, it does open the door for us to host another public meeting once the plan is revised. We also are pleased to say that we've submitted our funding request for the bathymetry project. So all our documentation, thank you to Andrea for the help there, has been submitted to the province, and they're now reviewing our submission. The other thing too of note is climate change coordinators in the throes of engaging the community through a survey. And so you'll see the link to the survey. So if your constituents are interested in being involved in the survey, they can fill it out for another week or so. And finally, I just report that now that the good weather is here, so are some of the rise of incidents in terms of shoreline protection. And so the forester has been active over the last number of weeks doing some investigations. And that's about it. Thank you.
Are there any questions on the planning report? I'm glad to hear that there will be another public meeting on the Center Lake application. It seems like it's quite a controversial proposal, so look forward to the results of that. Could I have a mover and a seconder for the planning report? Councillor Roberts and Councillor Burton.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Burton. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council received the May 25th, 2022 staff report entitled Planning Department Update for information.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, next are the administrative reports, and first is the rail trail status report. Be bringing Robert in for that. Morning, Mr. Sutton.
Good morning, Warden. Good morning, Council. We're also bringing in our new Deputy Director of Public Works, Sylvain Cloutier, to help out if there's any detailed questions. I guess similar to what Steve was saying, just would like to congratulate Sil on the promotion. As Council may know, Sil's worked here for almost 13 years and is a very valued resource with his commitment and dedication.
We'd like to add our congratulations to you, Sil.
Thank you very much.
And then with our May rail trail status report, this is the first one of the season. Just wanted to note that the trail was open to ATV traffic and allowable summer uses on May 2nd. We are looking at some spot repairs and spring maintenance compaction on the trail, as we'll be doing that in conjunction with the dust suppression that's currently scheduled for later this week. So that'll be completed over the coming days. We also have the rail trail detour. If Council will recall, last summer, we had a meeting, the Township of Minden Hills were trying to schedule a project. It had to be retendered due to cost implications, and it's now scheduled to start early June. We have some preliminary schedule information where they'll again start early June, and the bridge closure is looking to be around the end of June, early July. We'll get some more information from our colleagues at Minden Hills and respond accordingly. We are also working still on the accessibility improvements and interpretive signing initiatives. They've taken a bit of a backseat, as well as with the rail trail roundtable, just due to staff and resources and time. That's a quick update for now. And if there's any questions from Council, we're here to respond. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear that you're going to be addressing the compaction concerns, because there's been quite a few people raise concerns about their ability to navigate their bicycles. Councillor DeVolen and then Councillor Roberts.
Well, good morning, and whether it's Robert or Sil, the nature of the compaction, is there a general trend? Is it the problem with the size or the spec of the aggregate, or that there wasn't enough of it in those areas? Would you wish to comment and give me some more technical analysis of what the underlying problem is?
Sure. Through the Warden to the Councillor, I'll start, and if Sil has anything else to add, we can go with there. The material that we use is a waste product from grain that are crushing. So the spec is not like a grain or A or whatever we use in a road base. So the material is what we expected. Sil and I have reviewed the trail as of last week, and we've noticed some definite issues where the best areas are in the shady areas, or where the drainage isn't the best, so in some of the swampy areas, and the drier areas, so out in the sun without shade, or where it's high up, are some of the excuse me, more problematic areas. So we're looking at the compaction we talked about, we added it to the budget this year. So the proactive maintenance that we want to continue to compact the trail, we believe there's very minor, if any, grading that's required. So we're going to be concentrating on compacting the trail. We're also looking at extending some of our calcium limits because that can help keep things together. So we're going to just study and monitor those areas and see how we can best address them.
Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, and actually thank you for that, because that's was one of my questions as well. And I appreciate your timely phone call to me as I rode my bike on the trail at one point, and so Sil and Robert and I had a good discussion. And so thank you for attending to that, because there are a lot of people that want to use the trail for cycling, and you know, like you just described, you'll hit the nice hard part where it is in a darker shaded area, swampier area, and then all of a sudden you're barely able to ride your bike. So thank you for working on that and continuing. One thing I wanted to ask is, were we ever going to consider maybe doing our own, we have a map currently of the rail trail, but it doesn't, and I know the Fort organization has a map of the rail trail, but it doesn't show some alternate parking areas, and it doesn't show the kilometer distance between point A and B and C and D and so on. So I wondered if that would ever be a goal of the counties to have their own rail trail map with markings, the kilometer markings along.
Through the warden to the councillor, that's an excellent point. We certainly could look to that. It might even be something that we could roll into the round table because it'd be something that we'd be looking to the signing aspect as well. So that's a good point that staff can certainly review.
Go ahead.
Just for instance, at the Gold Crossing intersection, Dysart, along with a local landowner in that area, created a parking space right there. So that's a nice entry point that you can, you know, start with your car if you're walking or even want to transport your bike. So just things like that. And I know that there are some other spots that I've used along the rail trail. So to actually designate those as parking or entry points. Thanks.
And through the warden to the councillor, during Sil and I review of the area, we do have some tentative parking improvement areas that we rolled in some budget dollars through this year that we were planning to come back to council with a report once we figure out where to put the benches and what parking lot improvements we could recommend within budget limitations.
Any other questions on the rail trail report? Thank you, gentlemen. Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive this report? Councillors DeVolen and Moffat.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council received the May 25th, 2022 staff report, May Rail Trail status report.
All in favor? That's carried. Next is the Regional Tourism Relief Fund grant application and an update on that. Morning, Scott.
Good morning, Warren and members of council. So just wanted to give you a quick update today. There's a grant that was launched by Odo through funding through the provincial government under a very tight timeline. So in a best case scenario, we wanted to get you this before it was applied for, but just didn't allow for it when it was launched. And we just wanted to make you aware of what we were applying for. So it's a tourism relief fund. We tried to keep to the spirit of the regional relief fund that was applied for through the federal government that council is aware of last August. And just a couple notes, it is 100% funding through Odo. So there's no cash contribution requirement for the county to offset any of the expenses identified in the grant. As well as if we're successful, we'd still be required to come back to council with a transfer payment agreement or a funding contribution agreement from Odo that would require council's approval to enter into that agreement. And happy to field any questions.
Are there any questions on that report? Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report? Councillors DeVolen and Burton.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Burton. Be it resolved that Halliburton County Council received the 25th, 2022 report on the Regional Tourism Relief Fund grant application for information.
All in favor? That's carried. Just a note, Scott, the summit that was held last week was well attended and was very well done. Congratulations to your staff who were involved in that, and to the other organizers of the event.
Thank you, Warden. I'll pass on those kind words.
Okay, the next report is the 2021 year-end closing entries.
Good morning.
Andrea?
At the April 27th council meeting, council approved a number of year-end transfers to reserve in the process of finalizing our year-end. Now that our audit is complete, we do require one final adjustment, as I've outlined in my report, to close our books for 2021. This adjustment is a result of the new system setup and corrections required that were found during the audit. With this final adjustment included, the county's 2021 year-end reserve balance, including Safe Restart and modernization funding, will be $8,590,229.64. Are there any questions?
Any questions on that report? Hearing none, could I have a mover and a seconder to receive that report? Councillors Roberts and Moffat.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that Halliburton County Council receives for information the staff report on the 2021 year-end closing entry and approves the final adjusting entry from reserves as documented in the report.
All in favor? That's carried. And finally, under this section, the Infrastructure Ontario debt application. I believe we're going to hear from.
We'll be bringing in Robert and Andrea. Yeah.
Hello again.
Hello again.
Warden and Council, and we have the Infrastructure Ontario debt application that we spoke to Council about during the budget process, that we estimated a very high conservative number of approximately $5.1 million that may be needed for a loan this year to address a number of structural key priorities. The tenders are now complete, and we're in under budget, and the biggest reason for that would be that we did do some scope reduction or right sizing for a couple of the projects, both the Lower Cup Lake as well as the Dragon River Bridge. So that's the good news on the amount required front. So we have a requirement for approximately $4.152 million that we're looking to get approval for a loan. The chart that's on the second page of the report talks about the different loan types for the years, 5-year versus 10-year versus 15. Council will note there's the different interest rates. The paragraph that follows that notes that the loan payment, principal and interest, will be $565,000 and then lower to $436,000. That's referring to the 10-year loan. For example, that 5-year loan, the payments would actually be an average of about $900,000 per year, with initial year of about $956,000 and lowered down to $868,000, just for council's benefit. So I guess we're recommending that council approve this and that we put in the application to reserve the interest rate and move forward with these projects.
Anything you want to add to that, Andrea?
No, Robert and I worked fairly closely on this, so his numbers that he has provided you are all accurate. We did look at also funding ourselves internally with our reserves and did determine that our reserve levels just aren't sufficient enough to be able to utilize those. So we are recommending to move ahead with the 10-year serial loan.
Questions? Councillor Roberts?
I think that's probably the middle ground is the best way to go and not dipping into reserves. I agree with that. Is the loan locked in loan though? Is there any ability for whatever reason in the future, if there was funds or a future council wanted to use reserves, the reserves that got built up, is this loan open like at the 7-year mark, or is it a locked in 10-year loan?
That's a very good question. I believe it is a locked in, but I would have to confirm that. But I believe that is it at this time.
Yeah, just to follow up, just to see if there were any penalties in the event that you wanted to pay early for some reason.
So would you like that clarified before we agree to move forward?
Just throwing it out on the floor for conversation. Maybe I'm only bringing it up, just asking the question.
Councillor DeVolen?
Sorry, we can't hear Councillor DeVolen.
Oh, sorry, I need to put my mic on, I forgot. I'm saying the infrastructure loans we've done in Minden Hills are locked in for the term. You don't get a reduced rate. If you pay it out prematurely, you pay the full value of the note. I'm not saying for sure this is it, but I'm saying that's been our experience.
Councillor Roberts.
It wasn't that you always have to pay out, but there are penalties for paying, just like a closed mortgage, I believe, is if you actually paid anything early, there's sometimes 3 months penalty charge for paying early. So no, it's not. I wouldn't want to postpone this. It was just a question in the event that you just said, Andrew, that we aren't going to use reserves, but reserves might get built up to a certain point. There might be also a reason for borrowing again. So you might want to pay off the other loan. And I just didn't want to see penalties incurred if you wanted to pay off early.
Councillor Rao.
Yeah, Andrew, the other thing you could find out too, I know in the mortgage that my daughter has, every year she has the option to pay off without any penalty at all, roughly 15% of the outstanding balance. That might be a compromise for what Councillor Roberts was talking about, where we may not be able to pay it all off, but in any given year, we may be able to pay extra.
So what is council's wish to move forward, or would you like to wait for clarification on these questions? Councillor Moffat?
I guess I would ask, in order not to delay moving ahead, is what would change the outcome? What information to be received would change the outcome of making a decision today? Or is it just information that you're looking for?
Go ahead.
Seeing as I asked the question, really just information. It wouldn't change the outcome. I think we should go ahead with this recommendation. I'm just looking at, we already have a current loan for infrastructure that we took out a couple of years ago. We know with our asset management plan and the state of our bridges that we're likely going to need to borrow again. So, I'm just looking much longer term, even though I have stated I'm not going to be here, but I care about the county and their financial state. So no, I wouldn't really change anything. So it was a question for information only.
Councillor Burton, did you have a question or comment?
No, just to go ahead with it.
Okay. Any other comments, concerns? Could I have a mover and a seconder then to move forward with this request? Councillors Burton and DeVolen.
Moved by Councillor Burton, seconded by Councillor DeVolen. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council received the May 25th, 2022 staff report, Infrastructure Ontario Debt Application, and further that Haliburton County Council authorized the submission of an application to Infrastructure Ontario for $4,152,933 of long-term debt as recommended in the report. And finally, that staff be directed to present a bylaw authorizing this application.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. And we look forward to just that information and clarification on those questions that were raised. So we'll move into reports and minutes from external boards and agencies. Any information you'd like to impart from the health unit at all, Councillor Roberts?
Yeah, there's a couple things that are meeting, although there's not minutes there, but our meeting of May 19th from the Medical Officer of Health regarding COVID-19, really just the continuous recommendation to get your booster dose. they've actually had quite a slow uptake on people getting their third and fourth doses. Not really sure why. Maybe some people have had COVID and feel that they're not going to get it. Maybe people are waiting to the fall, but there is a recommendation to get your booster. We still are not out of the woods, and they do not know, what's next. So get the booster as if you can. And we had a presentation by Richard Ovcharovich, if I could say his name right, regarding it's a campaign called the Yellow Ribbon Campaign, and they've reached out to local municipalities. So I don't know if they've reached out to, I know that they have with Dysart, partnered with Dysart, and any municipality could participate. It's regarding dogs and dog bites. And it's a campaign to promote that if your dog is wearing a yellow ribbon on his leash or collar, that dog to not warn people, but I suppose that's the only word I can think of, to let them know to, ask the owner, may I pet your dog? May I approach your dog? So anyway, it's I know Dysart is participating. So if any of your municipalities want to participate, maybe Richard's already reached out to you, but I thought that was a really good campaign of dog safety, especially with young children who seem to kind of just zoom to dogs that aren't necessarily wanting to be pet by little children. So that's it for the health
I'm
unit.
guilty of zooming to
Yeah.
dogs myself.
Yes.
Any questions for Councillor Roberts? And they're specifically referring to the second booster as well as the first booster shot.
It's sort of the third and fourth. I mean, all round get your COVID vaccine, but the uptake on the third and fourth booster doses has been quite slow. And they're available.
Thank you. Anything from point in time, Councillor Schell?
Well, our meeting was actually canceled last night and postponed till next Tuesday. However, we heard from Mark this morning regarding the pilot project for rural transportation, and you'll see in the minutes, and this continues, that the youth hub is continuing to trend upwards as far as seeing young people come in. So that's encouraging.
Thank you. I was at an Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus meeting last week, which was it was nice to have an in-person session. We met in Pembroke. We had a presentation from Roma. As you've seen, I'm sure all of you, the report from Roma with the number of recommendations that they've made, but they've honed in on a number of priority actionable items. Specifically expanded digital connectivity, a more creative, a full spectrum approach to housing and attainable purpose-built housing, long-term care and less need for travel, and that's part of improved access to services, rethinking growth and development in rural Ontario and trying to address labor shortages. In particular, they honed in on a term that I had never heard, which was purpose-built units, which I found really interesting, which is more like strictly rental units, not condominiums or for sale. So I like to see that focus. They spoke to the amount of contribution that rural Ontario makes to the province's economy, and that it's not focused on sufficiently. And as I mentioned earlier, they also are looking at the definition of rural, because a lot of rural communities are lumped in with larger urban centers, and so the numbers are not accurate. So they would like to kind of drill down on that and on defining rural municipality. We also had a presentation by a lawyer and accountant. I think it was a lawyer. To changes to the Urine bylaw specifically. I don't know whether you want to speak to that, but they found that Urine has opportunities for some commercial activities where they could actually make some revenue and turn it back into Urine's coffers. So their bylaw now allows them to do that. They are more clearly defining the type of membership between municipal and public members. They're looking for more specific expertise from the members of the public that are on the board, and how to define sort of creatively floating the number of members on the board so that there's always continuity and so that it better manages things like elections. Because it's interesting to see new members being appointed to boards when some of the people are not going to be, or not necessarily going to be in place in the next term, which is interesting. We also made some minor changes to the EOWC bylaw. We revisited the Warden's Caucus's priorities. There was kind of a long list of secondary priorities that we had from our first meeting when we did our goals and objectives for the year, and some differences of opinion on where we should go with that. So just to kind of re-solidify, housing is at the top of the list for an issue for us to deal with some secondary work being done on the Ontario Health Team and teams and their governance, as well as healthcare human resources, and more specifically doctors and communities. We're all having just absolutely astronomical problems with doctors. There's an update that we received on the project that the Warden's Caucus is working on with the Rural Ontario Institute on housing and tools that can assist municipalities in that regard. And there were nominations received for the Eastern Ontario Leadership Council, and we recommended Jennifer Murphy from Bonnechere Valley and Roger Haley from Leeds and Grenville to move forward as actually the only people who put their names forward. Other than that, we will be receiving a presentation from, as I'm sure I've made you all aware, a presentation from Urine in June. And despite the fact that we've agreed that for some time we will be receiving our delegations virtually, I thought that this was a big enough priority for us all to have them come and present to us in person. So if everyone is in agreement with that, that's the way we'll proceed. We had a very brief conversation about the fact that MOT will be establishing a task force on transportation. And one of the things that I asked for them to add to their focus was municipal airports to be included in their view of transportation. And that's it for me. If there's anything I missed. Okay. Joint social, I'm sorry, go ahead.
If I could, a question on your report, just the fact that you mentioned that Urine is going to be coming in June. I'm passing this on from a fellow councillor. Do we know where things are at with, I mean, Roger's got the contract, but do we know where things are at in terms of actually building cell towers? We feel like a little bit left in the dark or service, particularly just at a cottage association meeting on the weekend where it's probably one of the poorest areas for cell service in the county. And, you know, we just weren't able to tell them anything overly concrete. And I just wondered if we also, you're hearing from Urine, but is that Urine telling us where the Rogers project is at?
Urine will be giving us a full update on the cell project and where they're going forward with the Rogers project. I don't want to take away any of their news on. I don't think that anybody in Haliburton County is going to be ecstatic about the scheduling. I don't want to go any further than that. And if I'm sorry, Councillor DeVolen, if you'd like to add to that.
Well, my comment would be this. What is Haliburton's going to have the most new towers of anybody in Eastern Ontario, and the process to get approvals to have towers is the longest process of all. Upfit and co-locate and whatever are predominantly what has dominated the landscape. So I would say that some of those may start that are part of the Rogers project before the end of the years, but more likely in 23 and 24. And I would say to when this process is a bit further along, and certainly The duty to consult is a big new and precedent-setting part, and I will comment generally, it has gone very well, so we're very happy. But it's another part of the process. And certainly new builds, it falls squarely in that category. I think I had said before publicly that building new towers will be the longest process of all the processes. So the reality, you'll see some EOR news or commentary from other counties or jurisdictions that things are happening sooner, but those are on existing sites with all the approvals in place and whatever. I think that EOR, both in Haliburton County, the northern part of Hastings, and Renfrew County, we're kind of all in the same boat in terms of, we'll use my words, crummy or no service, so that everybody is as eager as those that are at your cottage associations. I would say as these proposals come forward within your jurisdictions for approval, because there's a municipal approval part, do your best to rally support and expedite it and not take there's enough layers of control already that I think the environment and the public and the First Nations interests are all well represented. And so to expedite the process as they come to your municipalities, this guess. I know I said a lot, but I didn't really kind of say the nuts and bolts of what you're looking for. Councillor Roberts, and I'm sure Councillor Kennedy, but new towers take more time, full stop.
Well, and just to add to that, and thank you, that's a much more fulsome response. There is work being done in the meantime on existing infrastructure and boosting and improving to the best of their ability. They can do that. There's been an acknowledgement that there will be improved communications going forward, which I think will help. But we'll hear a lot more in June.
I appreciate the update. And like I said, I'm just passing along a message from a fellow councillor in Dysart. And I appreciate that. And I look forward to the June presentation by EOR. So thank you.
Okay, anything from Joint Social and Housing Services?
This body meets quarterly, which actually is next Wednesday, as well as the Housing Corporation. So that on the heels of this in the month of June, both from the Housing Corporation and the Joint Social and Housing Services Committee, you'll be hearing from me at that time.
Thank you. I don't believe that we've got anything on professional recruitment. Anything that you'd like to bring forward from the library?
If I could, I would like to just mention at the May 11th meeting, we had a presentation from a staff member, Tessa Isles. She did an overview on the marketing and promotion campaign, and she showed us well, we're not ready to fully launch our logo or the website. That'll be happening in June, but we're already transitioning some material, and it was just wonderful to see how clear and easy to read, and it meets all the AODA requirements. And so just get ready to see our new and exciting library website launched, I believe, was it June, like the same days our library board meeting, June 8th.
There's a lot of exciting and positive news coming out of the library, which is nice to see. Okay, I guess we need a mover and a seconder to receive the reports and minutes from external boards and agencies. Councillor Kennedy and Councillor Chell.
Moved by Councillor Kennedy, seconded by Councillor Shell. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council receives for information the following: the March 2nd, 2022, 22nd, 2022 approved minutes from Point in Time Center for Children, Youth, and Parents, and the April 13th, 2022 approved minutes and the May 11th, 2022 draft minutes from the Haliburton County Public Library Board.
All in favor? It's carried. Okay, next is the report from the Land Division.
Thank you, Madam Chair, to the rest of the council. So we were fairly active last meeting, dealing with a number of applications, 9 in total. Was split pretty much evenly between new lot creation and lot additions. The discussion was quite exciting. All the applications were approved. We did have one file that had a hiccup with the presenters, so we're updating our approach to how we'll handle presenters. We'll ask them to register in advance so that the chair has a good idea of who's speaking and when. So thank you very much.
Any questions on the land division report? Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report? Councilors Burton and Ryle.
Moved by Councillor Burton, seconded by Councillor Ryle. Be it resolved that Halliburton County Council received the May 25th, 2022 report entitled Land Division Activity Report for information.
All in favor? That's carried. Next up is Good Roads. Do you have any update for us, Councillor Burton?
I do not. We haven't met. We are going to be meeting in June and I'll have a report then.
Thank you. Any other information you'd like to impart on Urine behalf?
Well, to build on the warden's comments from the warden's caucus with respect to Urine, that yes, continuity on the board is important, and there are some things being explored, I guess I would say, with the composition of the board, whatever. I can tell you on a personal level that as I am done the term in, we'll say, the spring of next year in the Urine board, my intention is to put my name forward as a member of the public to have continuity on the board, if I should have the good graces. That also resets the clock with respect to my tenure, so that if I'm successful, it means that I could serve another 6 years after next spring on the EM board to see at least the completion of the Silgat project and explore the private company that we created, ECS, and the opportunities are there to take it to be bigger and larger and grow a bigger pool of expertise in that area, and earn some profits that will reduce or eliminate future municipal contributions that may exist for EORN for the benefit of the municipalities in Eastern Ontario.
It's excellent. I'm sure that you'll receive our support on that. It's continuity, as you say, is really important, and to have a strong voice from Halliburton County is important. Okay, under other business, we've got the meeting calendar. Are there any errors or omissions on the calendar? Hearing none, we are now moving into closed session. If I could have a mover and a seconder to move into closed. Councillors Moffat and Councillor Dolan.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor DeVolen. Be it resolved that Halliburton County Council enter into closed session for the following reasons: litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board.
All in favor? It's carried. All right, so there's no report out of closed. We will move into the bylaw section of the meeting. First up is the bylaw to authorize an agreement with provincial road markings. I have a mover and a seconder for that. Councillor Roberts and Burton.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Burton. Be it resolved that bylaw 4107, being a bylaw to authorize an agreement with Provincial Road Markings Incorporated for the supply and application of pavement markings, be considered to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? It's carried. Next is the bylaw to authorize an agreement with Parkland Fuel Corporation. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Councillors DeVolen and Ryle.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Ryle. Be it resolved that bylaw 4108, being a bylaw to authorize an agreement with Parkland Fuel Corporation for the supply and delivery of bulk diesel and unleaded gasoline fuel, be considered to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? It's carried. Next is the bylaw to approve the submission of an application to the Ontario Infrastructure and Lands Corporation. Moved by Councillor Kennedy, seconded by Councillor Burton.
Moved by Councillor Kennedy, seconded by Councillor Burton. Be it resolved that bylaw 4109, being a bylaw to approve the submission of an application to Ontario Infrastructure and Lands Corporation for the long-term financing of certain capital works of the Corporation of the County of Haliburton, and to authorize the entering into of a rate of offer letter agreement pursuant to which the municipality will issue debentures to OILC, be considered to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? It's carried. Next is the bylaw to appoint a secretary treasurer and deputy secretary treasurer to the Land Division Committee. Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Rao.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Ryle. Be it resolved that bylaw 4110, being a bylaw to appoint the secretary treasurer and deputy secretary treasurer of the Land Division Committee for the County of Haliburton, be considered to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? It's carried. Next is a bylaw to appoint a member of the public to the Community Climate Action Plan Advisory Group. I have a mover and a seconder. Councillor Shell and Councillor Moffat.
Moved by Councillor Shell, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that bylaw 4111, being a bylaw to appoint a member of the public to the Community Climate Action Plan Advisory Group, be considered to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? That's carried. Next is the bylaw to delegate authority during the lame duck period. I have a mover and a seconder, Councillors DeVolen and Moffat.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that bylaw 4112, being a bylaw to delegate council's authority to the chief administrative officer for the period of nomination day to election day, August 19th, 2022 to November 15th, 2022, be considered to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? That's carried. Oh, and finally, a bylaw to amend the procedural bylaw. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Moffat and Roberts.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Roberts. Be it resolved that bylaw 4113, being a bylaw to govern the calling, place, and proceedings of county council and related committees, be considered to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? That's carried. Is there any notice of motions? Hearing none, could I have a mover and a seconder for the confirming bylaw? Councillor DeVolen and Councillor Shell.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Shell. Be it resolved that bylaw 4114, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the May 25th, 2022 meeting of Haliburton County Council, be considered to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? It's carried. And finally, could I have a motion to adjourn? A mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Kennedy, Councillor Burton.
Moved by Councillor Kennedy, seconded by Councillor Burton. Be it resolved that the May 25th, 2022 meeting of Haliburton County Council be adjourned.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you.